saw the games.
Physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You weren't on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the games. I watched the
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth, welcoming you to episode 32, the Mid-Major Purge. How the transfer portal has altered the landscape for mid-major teams and the NCAA tournament, recorded on the evening of Wednesday, May 28th, 2025. So, Robert, we finally have our George Martin. William McDermott has joined the show as our official producer.
Yes, and we're very happy to have you here, William, and glad you decided to take this on. So tell us a little bit about yourself, William. I mean, we talked a little bit last week, but tell our folks what's going on with you.
I'm excited to be a part of the team. Thanks for having me on, and happy to introduce myself. And I'm an IU grad, 2024. So not originally from Indiana, from Virginia, but I've kind of adopted the Hoosier ways, and I'm obviously a big basketball junkie. I covered IU basketball for 3 years, 2 of them at Inside the Hall. I have my own Substack blog. You can check it out if you want. Inside Indiana Basketball with William McDermott. It's kind of a long title. I probably need to find a better marquee name for that or something, but that's kind of what it's been so far. So check out my written work and everything on that. And yeah, just happy to be a part of the team and be helping you guys out.
And we have a familiar voice. I only recognized it when I linked you to watching some IU soccer games in the past. Maybe give a little bit of background of like what have you actually covered previously that maybe fans have some familiarity with.
When I was at IU, I did some Big Ten Plus TV work. So I did, a couple of the men's basketball exhibition games, some women's basketball games on Big Ten Plus, and then obviously, as you mentioned, men's soccer, which that was one of my favorite things, honestly, about IU, getting to call those games, just an electric crowd atmosphere, one of the best teams in the country consistently. It was always fun. They were always good. They were always winning. Those soccer games were just really, really fun to broadcast. And then I also was the co-sports director at WIUX, the student radio station at IU. And currently I'm the radio host for the University of Louisville radio network for their football and men's basketball games, on top of the writing and freelance broadcasting stuff I do in the state. And still living in Indiana. So that's me.
So you were at Rupp Arena when one of the Louisville fans chucked the beer,
I was there. Yeah.
And I want to just say for the record, that was not me. I'm not a Louisville fan. I was not that mad about the call. It just sailed over my left shoulder going right through the floor. So yeah. So you're working for UL, which is definitely, which is really a cool city, by the way. I know you spent some time down there. It's one of my favorites to go visit just because it has a nice, almost like it's like the last bastion of like the East Coast going into the South. It's just, you can run into the New York block and Atlanta block, and then you're in the middle of Derby.
It's almost like a little bit of a hidden gem, I think, in the area, because a lot of people, I think you look at Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Cleveland, even like Lexington, but once you go past Louisville, like you're really in the South. So it's a good little, like you said, it's a good little bridge in between the South and the Midwest, and right on the river. The river's not the most glorious river in this country, but it's a really cool city. I've always enjoyed my time down there, and it reminds me a lot of home as well. Growing up in Virginia, there's a lot of similarities between my hometown Richmond and Louisville. That kind of mid-scale state city type thing. Louisville's a little bit bigger, but it has some bigger teams and universities and stuff like that. But
tobacco, the big tobacco.
Right, yeah. Marlboro is like the capital. That's like what everybody in Richmond does or how they got all their money. So yeah. Horse racing and then tobacco, right? So that's kind of the main businesses of the two.
Throw in the Dizzy Whiz and you got yourself a weekend, really.
Right.
And if with the Dizzy Whiz, if you know, you know, and if you don't know, you need to find out. Google it, check it out next time you're down there, just as a quick thing. Fun for the whole family. Yeah,
I will. But I enjoy my time down there. It's a cool city. I think a lot of people overlook it as maybe just something we got to drive through or whatever. But there's a lot of cool places in there on top of Churchill Downs.
Right. and the UPS hub. Yeah. The reason people go.
Right.
So coming in from Virginia, we were talking a little bit about, the Indy 500 was this past weekend where there was another meeting at the undisclosed location and another race with a small this was a much shorter rain delay this year. But Mike, did now you're in Philly, so you can always watch the race, but
yes, that's never a problem.
Now you can. Did you watch any of it this year?
Yeah, I mean, and my history. I mean, I used to go to the race every year, as a child. And yeah, I still make a habit of watching the race. It's funny, like this year, it did remind me of some of those like really bad ones from like the past where it's almost like a baseball game where you get out of the first inning and the ball has not even left the infield. No one can hit. And you just know that, oh crap, this is 2.5 hours more of this. I know exactly how this is going to play out. And yeah, I mean, seeing, crashes literally in the warm-up lap, the bad weather, I just thought, yeah, this is going to be this could be rough watching. And unfortunately it turned out that way. Luckily I could actually turn it off and go do other things, but some other people apparently showed up at the race itself.
When you're there, you kind of feel obligated to stay till the checkered flag hits, no matter how gory, awful, and actually mind-numbingly boring some of the racing and how the whole experience is going. In this case, yeah, that was this year. So what you saw on TV was pretty much what was accurately depicted when you were sitting there in the stands.
That and the commercials. Yeah.
We don't get the commercials. Luckily we don't get the commercials.
That's the one benefit of going to the race, I guess.
Yeah, it really. Yeah, that and you actually get to see the racing throughout the field, and you kind of have a general idea what's going on. So, and
they
again,
they don't use the Delta Force theme anymore.
So Bennett and I, we were up doing the niece's graduation, and so it was going right into May, and it's like, okay, son, you need to learn something. You need to learn the Delta Force theme. So it's like he's 2 and 2. He's gonna be 3 in September. So like he watches Cars and he loves Cars. So it's like, okay, you can watch Cars and you get the Delta Force theme. We're gonna raise you to be a Hoosier. We're gonna raise you to be like the last Jedi here at the end here, where you're gonna be the one that you're gonna hold all the secrets because you have an old dad who wants to keep things like Cowboy Bob and the Delta Force theme alive in the state of Indiana.
He'll be the only kindergartner that can correctly identify who Sam Posey is.
And know why he hates Bobby Unser. And the other thing would be he's also going to be one of the few kids who are going to use Boom Baby when he hits a shot because that was a thing. Back when the Pacers were knocking on the door of the NBA Finals, beating the Knicks, going up head to head with Reggie and Spike. We're back at it, and we even had one where we had an Eastern Conference Finals game and the race on the same day where people were, jetting across town to get there to their seat from one seat to the other.
Yeah, no, I thought it was pretty cool, and it's funny. I always notice how the TV productions focus, where the camera is always seeming to point, and you notice they really try to hype up the whole celebrity matchup between the Pacers and the Knicks. It was I guess the last game was Pat McAfee and John Mellencamp versus Paul Atreides and Zoolander.
Yeah.
Or Bob, I guess possibly Bob Dylan and Gaylord Fokker, depending on
exactly. Yeah, that too. Paul Atreides, get on that, ride that worm. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Get on that.
Yeah. But no, that was great entertainment though, the backdrop, because the Pacers versus Knicks has always kind of had that. I mean, just the fact that Spike Lee versus Reggie Miller drama took place back in the 90s. I think it's almost just a template now that they run with. big city,
Mhm.
the country folk. It's like the perfect contrast for television.
John Halliburton is the Pacers' biggest celebrity right now.
He really
Tyrese
is.
dad.
Yeah.
He
Up
is.
in the
He is.
suite. He's back. Freed
Yeah.
man.
Just a sports dad rooting on my son.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
anybody who's been to a little league game since the turn of the century knows who this dad is. I mean,
That's right. Yeah.
what's the big deal? It's not a big one. But to Tyrese Halliburton's credit, I love the throwback stuff, like he did the Major League thing, the Major League 2 thing in this Cleveland series. When he's at Madison Square Garden doing the choke at the end of the regulation, it was like, man, you are tossing. This is high level, highly researched trolling. Like, this is not just something done off the cuff. This well enough to know I'm going to hit you where it hurts.
Yeah. And I know, like, in New York City, like, they still talk about that 1990s Pacers series, like both of them, like, the real controversial ones. That's why telling you, Bob, like, the next 2 visits I make to New York City to visit the in-laws could go very interesting. Just knowing the fact that, like, I'm like the one Indiana people a lot of people there know. And so the next time I go there, there's going to be that overhanging narrative is going to be there.
You mean somebody got out of flyover country?
Right. Like, well, the funny thing, when we go into the city, we take the Long Island Railroad, and we take the train from Bayside, Queens, right into Penn Station, which is essentially directly underneath Madison Square Garden. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I know in game 2 when it went really quiet, and I was texting with you. When it goes, like, Madison Square Garden, when it goes quiet, it is like deathly quiet. And I'm sure if you stood in the concourse, you could almost hear the faint rumble of the C trains running along, the 3-4 street line coming into Penn Station. It's like that kind of quiet.
Exactly. So with any luck, the Pacers will get it quiet again on game 5. Now, and William, you grew up a Nuggets fan, if I recall.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct.
So any hope for you guys moving forward? I would
very
think.
slim. They got to make some trades. Goodbye and good riddance to Michael Porter Jr. I say. I think the time has run its course with him. But we'll see what they do. I think Adelman is the right guy. I think they made the right decision with that. They just need a GM now, and then they can get rolling in the summer. But I think anybody kind of knew who follows the NBA that Nuggets roster was not championship caliber this season. But I wouldn't have said that about the Pacers roster either, earlier in the year. Hey, but they're deep, they're well coached, and they've got a superstar. So
they do. And I think we're going to probably discuss the idea of the single player theory kind of moving forward. There'll be some time over the summer to delve into some topics. So that's going to be brought up. Yeah. So real quick, speaking of deep, and when we talk about deep collections, and especially deep collections of vintage-esque apparel, our title sponsor, Home Field, is a great place to go for that. If you go on there, you can notice they'll see save 20%. So if you refer a friend of yours, that guy, the guy you go to the race with, and he asks you about your cool T-shirt you got from Home Field, refer him. He gets 20% off. You get 20% off. So it's a pretty good deal for you and for your friends to spread the word about Home Field apparel. Mike, what are you seeing these days?
Oh, well, I guess in the context of the race, I really like that the Indy 500 greatest spectacle bomber jacket. That thing was pretty impressive. I mean, it looks like Joseph Newgarden's amazing Technicolor Dream Coat, because that thing is just like resplendent with colors, very, very loud colors. And you want to remind me of, Bob, like if you look at that thing, there's like a red, yellow, and green stripe that kind of runs across the middle of it. It's strangely, I don't know, like this just shows like where my brain is. It reminded me of those like Wander, Indiana license plates from the 1980s.
Oh, I remember those. Yes,
you remember that?
Which
you
could still. I remember those well, and I remember that was and I remember you can still see those plates in men in their 70s garages right next to the right next to the one that had the covered Conestoga wagon and a couple others from that era of Indiana license plates. I don't know. I've had IU plates for the last few years, so I really can't tell you, but by few 20 plus. So yeah, there's that. William, do you have anything from home field that's catching you these days?
I have 4 things from home field. Of course, I've got the Indiana college football playoff shirt for when they made it. I've got an IU soccer shirt with the 8 stars on it from the national title teams. I've got a home field hoodie. It's cream colored. It's got Indiana script written across on the chest. So I'm an avid home field supporter. Good stuff, high quality, and very comfortable as well. The hoodie, especially, I wear it all the time.
Yeah, we would agree. And as you can all tell, I've got my Bison on because it is Bison Week. It's Bison commemoration. We'll talk more about that later. But what we'll do is when we come back. But first, I want to thank William for hopping on here. I know you got to run and introducing yourself to the crew and everybody. But when we do come back, we'll be kind of getting into our topic about the mid-low major purge and how it's impacting those teams and NBA as it moves forward when we come back on X's and Joes.
Welcome back to X's and Joes. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. So Bob, just thinking, when we throw these episodes together, in the back of my head, I try to think of a specific question that we can answer. It's typically a question, that fans are actually asking somewhere in the public sphere, either on message boards or even to us directly. I guess the question that kind of stood out coming into April was why are there so few upsets in the NCAA tournament now with the portal firmly in place in college basketball? Right. And and you saw it too. I mean, if you look on the discords, some of the comments were kind of like almost deliciously comical. Like, guys would chime in, I spent 12 hours filling out my bracket with, carefully selected upsets. And my 12-year-old niece who blindly picks the favorites slayed me in this year's tournament pool within her family, like WTF. And so, I mean, obviously, we're not the first pod to discuss this phenomenon because, I mean, I think most of them have generally pointed the finger in the right direction, saying, look, I mean, the portal, NIL are kind of the chief culprits in the change that's going on. Well, and I thought what we could do is obviously kind of delve a little bit deeper in terms of like walking through examples and explaining like exactly why this is happening and like, with some actual figures and numbers in place.
Well, and I think the other question is, it's a so many things in this world we want to say good, bad, X, O, yes, no. That's and it kind of goes to the what we don't do, and what you and I have never done in almost 30 years of knowing each other and being friends, which is okay. Take out the whole idea of a pro-con position necessarily, and just argue the facts and come up with what could be the best data-driven decision and the best data-driven result.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you don't like it. It isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
And in reality, the market, and you would be the first one to tell me, the market will correct itself. There will be corrections that will happen. It may not look the way that it did before. And it kind of goes back to, we were talking about the Indy 500. When you go back to the 60s and the 70s, when Tony Holman was turning that place into what it became, you always had different teams and different technologies being tried and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, definitely now even today, you now have much more standardization. And then the big teams have definitive advantages over smaller teams. And it's really hard to break in with an IndyCar team. Yeah. So the same thing's getting true here as well, which is you had all this time where you had, I wouldn't call it chaos, but you definitely had more variable results, more variables in your results. And the impact of that has been, well, you had a little more market volatility in the first 2 rounds. Right. And then all of a sudden, now that we have a seismic event that shifts the market, that shifts the concept. And yeah, I'm using economics terms. You know where I'm kind of going with this. It's just you have to kind of look at this as, all right, so what's next?
Yeah.
And how do you respond? Do you go to the big three in automotives, or do you find other people that are continuing to find ways of tinkering their garages to make the next big thing?
Yeah.
Can you have the Tucker Automobile Company, or can you build a Tesla eventually? That's kind of where we're going with this.
Exactly. Yeah. Market equilibrium, or finding the market equilibrium, is always I guess the term you look for. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the way I suppose that we could sort of approach it is taking a look at maybe how things used to work, like the old setup and the old format, looking at upsets of the past, how those rosters were basically brought together, then take a look at the present day and the flow of players and how the roster is constructed today, and figure out, okay, well, what's the gap? Like, what's the difference between what is true now and versus then? And I think we do that pretty succinctly, I guess, with some of the examples that we'll use today. I'll be putting slides up, and of course, for our viewers that our listeners that just do the audio only, will of course be posting these slides on the interwebs once this gets posted. So I wanted to take a look at just a few representative examples of upsets in the past in the NCAA tournament, where a small team obviously knocks off a bigger team in terms of their seeding. And the one I chose here, the first one is Mercer versus Duke in 2014. It was a first round game. I think it was actually in the Carolinas. I think it was like Greensboro region where this one happened. So it was like right in Duke's backyard when this one took place. And I remember watching it. Like, I know it's like not popular to say, but I did watch this at a Buffalo Wild Wings in New Jersey at the time. So I'm sorry that was what was available to me.
Win in the Garden State, right?
Yes, exactly.
In the Garden State. You weren't at a Wawa. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. There's only so many choices one can make.
Only so many.
Yeah. So what I want to highlight here is just the two different rosters that the starting rosters for those two teams. On the left, you have Duke, and on the right, you have Mercer. Duke had this was, I guess you might say, like a pretty typical Duke team. Leading scorer was a freshman, Jabari Parker, one and done. And just an assemblage of other, former 5-star recruits, mostly either freshman or sophomore. This case, like Rodney Hood, Quinn Cook was the only junior on that team that got major minutes. Rasheal Suleiman and Emil Jefferson. And that team had, in total, just with their starters, they had 10 years experience total in terms of years of experience. On the Mercer side, they had a roster: Langston Hall, Daniel Corsi, Bud Thomas, Anthony White, and Jake Gallen. I think Anthony White actually is from Indiana. I think it's Pike High School, maybe. I don't know.
I think so. Yeah.
But this team, all seniors, 20 years experience. And so, I mean, literally they had double the experience of that Duke team. And this highlights basically the first of the major advantages that a lot of these mid-major teams had in the tournament in these upsets, is that the overwhelming majority of them, in the upsets, the team that won in the upset had some kind of experience advantage over the higher ranked team that got upset. So in this case, I mean, literally it's, plus 10 years experience just on the starting five in terms of the gap.
Right.
Of course, you as a coach, Bob, you probably know this better than anyone. I mean, that's like obviously the talent discrepancy is obvious, just because, the higher rated seeds typically are going to just have more talent. But as a coach, you can probably speak more to this, but yeah, I mean, especially in a tournament environment where it's just a lot of like stress, and you're also tired at the end of the year, going into March. You're already kind of worn out as it is. A lot of that experience of just playing that many games obviously has a lot of some degree of advantage over the more talented teams.
Well, I would throw out, it's like in similar type of scenario here, 10 or almost 10 years later when Purdue loses to Fairleigh Dickinson in the first round.
Right.
Braden Smith has 7 turnovers. A freshman, Braden Smith, commits, has those. Purdue doesn't shoot particularly well from 3, so you have these 2 big warning spots where Fairleigh Dickinson's +7 in the turnover range than they were with 6 or 7 more possessions that they're getting a look on. They're hitting mid-range jump shots, which was kind of what Purdue was giving you is kind of what, if you were going to beat Purdue, you had to hit those.
Yeah.
But you also had a Fairleigh Dickinson team that was more juniors, I think one senior, couple juniors. They had more experience than Purdue, which was they were still freshman backcourt with Brandon Newman, and then they were still playing like Caleb First and Zach Edey, who was a junior. They were juniors out there, but it was not the same flow. And a lot of it comes down to when you need to make quick adjustments. Have you guys figured each other out enough yet where your primary and your secondary, your 1-2 options?
Yeah.
Can you start finding 3, 4, and 5? And even over the course of a season, sometimes it's really hard to kind of find that. Or if one of your guys just needs another off season to you would see today, Braden Smith is not going to make the same mistakes he made as a freshman as he did as a junior, and definitely not as a senior. The stats put everything we see with Braden has shown that out. So that's kind of an interesting way of looking at this scenario where the experience plays into effect.
Yeah, exactly. And the experience is just like, one of the key advantages. The second key advantage, and I don't think it's probably not as talked about as much as I think it should, but and again, it's something that coaches will sort of confirm if you ask them. Mm-hmm. It's just this idea of roster continuity. Like basically, how many games have they played together? Like how many practices have they been in together? How much total time have they spent together on the court in some capacity, whether it's in live game action or in practice. And in this example, I just put this slide where I show these two same core starting fives, where those individual players were 2 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
And on the Duke side, you see that only one of these players was actually at Duke, which was Quinn Cook. He was like the third man off the bench, so literally like the 8th guy, in the roster rotation for Duke, and was a 2012. And the rest of the guys were all still in high school. Emil Jefferson was, over my way at Friends Central Prep. Suleiman was still down at Strake Prep in Texas. Parker was, I think, the number 1 junior coming out of the Simeon Academy, and Hood was down in Mississippi. So again, these kids on the Duke side were basically just like coming together in this 1 year in 2014, basically kind of like thrown together, mostly just, component parts that had come in, basically like fresh into the program. It contrasts that with Mercer. The 4 of the 5 players on that Mercer team that beat Duke 2 years later, in 2012, 4 of the 5 were starters at Mercer together. That's Hall, Corsi, Thomas, and Gowan. I think White was a JUCO somewhere in the Midwest, I think, at that time. So again, it's a big deal, just the fact that, it's not just that they were together, they were starting together. So like for these 5 kids, from that point going forward and going into March in 2014, I think I counted, they started that core 4 or 5 had started together something like, 90 plus games together. So compare that advantage, obviously, to the fact that even that year that Duke played them in 2014, the starting lineup changed constantly that year. That was not like the starting 5 every single game. They were swapping guys in and out. So I think that Duke starting lineup that had gone against Mercer, I believe I counted, there were like 14 times that that core five had started together. Which again, so not just the fact that these players are more experienced, but they just actually just know each other. They play with greater familiarity, which again in basketball is like a big deal when you're talking about like microseconds of difference in terms of like anticipating what your teammate's going to do. And obviously, well, if you played with the guy long enough, you're able to anticipate his stuff much more than you did when you only played with him after 5 or 10 games.
And sometimes it's basically knowing where guys are going to be on defense. Can he close this gap? It's not just knowing your tag assignments and kind of stuff on X's on a whiteboard, but oftentimes it's just pass placement.
Right.
How quick a guy's cutting, how move. Like you'll watch this in Olympic basketball. In the United States brings their version of the dream team together, and it takes them. And they're still not to the level of international teams with the connectivity. They're just so good comparatively with skills, athleticism, and playing the game, but they're still not in that sort of international, with international mode of play where knowing exactly where the shooter, if you're kicking it out on a level 3 read, where did that shooter want the ball? And can you, and are you going to deliver that pass perfectly? Are you playing it confidently? Are you also confident knowing that guy's going to be exactly where you're putting it? Because that's the other thing is that, that 2-step shift. I mean, they're going to shift up to his spot. Where is this guy's like, Braden Smith probably knew where Fletcher Lawyer's spots generally were. He knows a lot better now where it is, and he can deliver it a lot better than he could 3 years prior. Same thing's true, when you look at the Duke teams of the past. Parker's trying to find guys and trying to figure out, okay, what pace do we play? How do we kind of work through all this? And then Mercer's going to throw some things that they're not used to seeing. Schematically, you're going to throw, these teams throw things that you're not really used to seeing when you're playing Power 5 opponents over the course of an ACC, Big Ten, SEC type season. You're going to see different looks, different mindsets, because they're playing at a level of basketball where system is can be a little different. Kind of looking at VCU and their chaos, on defense, or looking at the Princeton offense in '95 when they beat UCLA in the 5-12 game. I was actually at that game, and you're watching them control tempo, cutting back all this. It's a backdoor cuts, and you're watching a 35-second shot clock bleed down to 2 seconds, and all of a sudden, boom, back cut layup, and Princeton not deliberately not running the basketball, and they had an numbers advantage and pulling it back to run their offense because they knew they could soften the defense enough to get their systems to work. And that's just that connectivity you're talking about. I also want to just throw out this about this Mercer team. They won. This was the only team under Bob Hoffman who ended up this is the only team under Bob Hoffman who coached there for, I think, 11 seasons, who made it to an NCAA tournament. This was by far his best team. And their sophomore year, what you're seeing here, they were 27-11. Didn't make the tournament. 24-12 the next season, and then 27-9 in this 2014 season where they beat Duke in the NCAA tournament. So you also had a group here that for him, every once in a while, when coach, again, this was kind of one of his sweets, basically right around his honeymoon, he hit these guys on his honeymoon phase. Yeah. And this was the best he was going to do with this group. And it's a pretty good accomplishment beating Duke, much like that same week. I think Duke lost in that early in the Dome in '95 too. I might add in an 8-9 game. Yeah. So there's a lot to be said, for that, for where guys were and them playing together for a period of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's sort of like if we think about, always talking about the olden days, the pre-portal days. This is sort of like the common method by which really good mid-major teams their rosters. I mean, they would recruit guys. Oftentimes, they would have a pretty good core of dudes. Not necessarily like having 4 starters since you're a sophomore. I mean, I won't say it's an extreme example, but that's definitely not necessarily the most common. But yeah, you typically have 4 or 5 guys that would be around the same class and age that would kind of constitute like a core group of guys moving through the program. The way, IU fans, of course, think about the Buckner, Wilkerson, core of players, or going back in the 90s, like the Cheney, Graham, Reynolds, group moving through. So again, we're also familiar with this method of roster building. Now, what happens is once you institute the portal and also NIL kind of like sort of maybe serving as a little bit of an incentive to get into the portal in the first place, is that it just causes a rapid degree of displacement within the mid-major conferences. So I put a slide here for the Southern Conference. The Southern Conference is where Mercer University is situated. I put this slide up just to show the players within the Southern Conference, what the top returnees of players that still have eligibility going into 2025, 2026, and where they are currently destined to go. And in this example, in the Southern Conference, of the 11 top players that still have eligibility within the SoCon, only one of them is actually returning to school. That's, here in the example is TJ Johnson from VMI. All the rest of the players are going elsewhere. The top player, Kwamari Peterson, again, I think another Indiana kid, he's going to Washington from East Tennessee State. PJ Smith from Furman and Ricky Bradley for VMI. They're both in portal uncommitted, but I think they're supposed to be committing with the next 2 weeks or so. But you see the other schools, Kenyon Giles going to Wichita State, Honor Huff going to West Virginia, Trey Fort from Sanford's going to Michigan State, Jaden Brownell from Sanford's going to USC. All these kids that in the past, in the old configuration of college basketball, who without the portal would have been returning to their schools and thus would have been able to build the kind of roster that you saw in the Mercer example that was able to beat Duke. Now that's being completely disrupted by the fact that the portal exists and the best players are basically leaving for these better schools.
And you have to kind of look at it, when as we discussed, and UT Chattanooga actually ended up winning, and Honor Up was interesting to watch. I remember watching him with Tonsoni at the NIT final up in Indianapolis. Right. Same with Trey Bonham. I think he's their big, if I recall correctly. These were some very skilled, together they make for a good college basketball team that can win an NIT. Mm-hmm. But you strip some of the pieces out and you put them with other pieces that maybe they're not as impactful as they were for their team in the Southern Conference in a low major or mid major. You're looking at now maybe they're a much bigger piece of a puzzle where they're able to contribute, maybe not as much statistically, but they can definitely contribute. They don't have to play to their weaknesses as much. They can actually concentrate on accentuating their strengths. Like we're talking about with Wilkerson at IU, maybe some of the stuff where he doesn't have to go to the rim as much. He can actually focus more on hitting shots, or when he does go to the rim, he'll have better opportunities to do so because he's surrounded by different talent that can actually get the ball to the rim, where he's not going to be asked to do. Here are the things you do really well, and we need you. You do this well enough for this conference for us to be successful, but it's not something that's going to translate well to when you're playing a Power 5 schedule and when you're playing against Power 5 teams. So we're going to, we may constrain that piece of your game that you're not very strong at, but we'll have somebody else that can do that. Whereas where they were before, good chance that like a Sam Houston State, that you have to be more of a one trick. You're kind of a one trick pony, and you need to be on every single game.
Yeah.
It's interesting seeing that, again, Power 5 offers, because now you're talking about revenue sharing that are going to be close to that $20.5 million cap.
Yeah.
Revenue share, as well as the additions of, what we call NIL or, private sponsorship money, whatever you want to call it. Whereas they're sitting at these low and high mid majors, and some are making low 5 figures. Some are getting close to the 6-figure range. When you start talking about the programs we're talking about, you're looking at going into your senior year, your 4th year of college basketball. You're saying to yourself, I kind of want, and you may already have your degree from UT Chattanooga, and you may say, I can do a year of master's work at West Virginia, kind of setting myself up a little more as I go into life after my playing days are done, whether I play overseas, play G League,
Yeah.
I can have something more to fall back on as I get there, and they're willing to pay me, and they're also willing to pay me a significant multiplier of what I was making at, UNCG or Virginia Military Institute. So
Yeah.
those are some things that these guys, and it also kind of again shows their mettle a little bit more. I mean, who's going to be the next Ryan Conwell? You could be the next guy there. You could be that next player where you just have leveled up, especially if you're a freshman, a rising sophomore, rising junior. You might find yourself as the next Dalton Connect, let's say.
Exactly.
Could you be in that position? But it is interesting now. We'll talk about this a little later, but this is a big change in the game with that area.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, and obviously, just any rational person in this similar situation would try to maximize their value, right? And try to actually go like, even if outsiders might say, well, why aren't they being loyal to the school that's recruited them? It's like, well, how many people, I mean, and I'm saying this as a former HR person, I don't find a lot of people, when they have the opportunity to make many multiples more money than what they're earning now, will say, no, I'm good. I'm going to stay here.
We're going to pay you somewhere between 5 and 20 times what you're making here for 1 year. And by the way, you have 1 year left in your career. That's the other thing. You have 1 year left to do this. And if I'm on or off, here's my question. If I'm saying to myself, are we going to top what we did winning the NIT?
Right.
Have I hit the pinnacle here for where I can do at UT Chattanooga?
Exactly.
And talking to those Chattanooga fans in line getting a beer, I mean, they were excited to see these guys play. They were ecstatic that they made that 6-hour drive up from Chattanooga to go see this. And I mean, if you're this guy, you're thinking, I'm going to have a shot I'm going to cash in on this, because why wouldn't I? Because coaches do it too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing if you think about, like in the past, like if there are less upsets in the NCAA tournament, how is that going to change the dynamic of that we've been used to in like March going into April, where schools will hire the coach that just made the miracle run? But if the miracle runs reduce in number, where are they going to be? Like, how is that going to change basically where the big school is going to look for, like, the next big thing, if they're not going to have, the Tobin Andersons coming out in the same rate as they did before.
And that it is one of those things where you have to kind of, again, go back to the metric that you were talking about when I was going through the coaching search. Have you set your win record at your institution?
Right.
Like, to me, it would be a good question. Like, why did Ben Hoffman at Mercer stay there as long as he did?
Yeah.
Why did he go? Could he have leveled up after those seasons to show maybe going from a Southern Conference team, I believe, to even Atlantic 10 type school would have possibly been there. And I'm not sure what happened. I could go back in KenPom and look, but in fact, I'll just take a real quick look at Bob Hoffman. Yeah, he retired at Mercer after being a Texas Pan American. So he was done in coaching after that. But the miracle run question, I think, comes into play, which is, the Shaka Smart thing. Shaka Smart's a prime example of this. Or Shalil Holloway when he was at St. Peter's going to Seton Hall. That for many, Tom, you can make the argument for Tom Crean and even Archie Miller, had similar types of career ascendancy based on a tournament run. That doesn't mean, though, you don't have the Bruce Webbers of the world who may have, was it really the tournament run or what he did at Southern Illinois? Because you have to look at the total package. And so at this point, you have to look at more like a Ben McCollum or a Darren DeVries, who they prove themselves, and then you bring them into the Power Five, because you're even though they may not have won a whole lot of tournament games, they still show they can compete at a high level. And then maybe you are looking at record versus Power Five. That could be a big question with that. Do they take lower level players and have them be competitive against mid-level Power Five conference teams, or occasionally the one upset's one thing. It's to me, it's more of a consistency of result. That's I think really where the question lies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in the example with the SoCon, I went through all the conferences and just kind of did the same exercise, just saying like, okay, well, where are the players, like the top 10, 15, 20 players that are returning to college with eligibility? Where are they going next year? And so, like, I mean, even looked at like one of the more, I guess, like hopeful examples of a conference where you had at least some larger percentage of the players that are returning to, their original school within the conference. And like Missouri Valley Conference, I mean, that they had 3 of their top 15 are coming back to their original school. That's Walker and Kinzinger at Illinois State and Lumblade at Belmont, but all the rest are going. So that's like, that's like an 80% bleed rate at the Missouri Valley Conference, even though the Missouri Valley Conference has one of the best like retention rates, compared to all the others. And yeah, and again, it's just mostly like Power 5 schools, Iowa, BYU, Nebraska, Wake Forest, Xavier, Oregon State. You get a few like when the lower down you go, typically you'll see like more kids that are like going to, let's say, like other schools that are at least like maybe on the same level, or at least like a lateral move, like Vincent Bradley from Missouri State's going to High Point, and Jane Doherty's going to Richmond. So it's so yeah, it's kind of interesting, like seeing the contrast of like where players are going, because what I find when I was kind of like just eyeballing the numbers, what you see is that if you're a kid in the mid-major and you're scoring, let's say, around 10 plus points a game, and you're a starter, if that describes you, then you're going to transfer out with about a 80% certainty rate, if not higher. Okay. That's like the cut line. Now, if you're below that, if you're like not in the starting 5 and you're kind of like at 7, 8 points per game, then your retention rate is actually pretty decent to stay at the school. In fact, like if you do transfer, the more likely probability is that you're transferring down or over. You're not transferring out.
So we'll leave this slide up here when we come back from our break, just because I think it's that whole idea of this, what we're talking about is grinding your way up into that offer from from a higher major or a school that has again, going from like a 1-bid conference to a multi-bid conference potentially is is really, I think, where the cutoff is. And so we'll kind of get into that a little bit, and then kind of looking at, how systems kind of play into that a little bit as well, that, how you played it, where you are, what you're doing, how that impacts how you move up when we come back on X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. So yeah, Bob, going through these examples and, just discussing like the Missouri Valley Conference, like you could take this same phenomenon and just kind of like, apply it, across conferences, but also just like looking back and just thinking about like, what I said about sort of like the cut line of like the kids that are leaving. And the general criteria is like you're a starter and you're scoring about 10 points a game.
Right.
That's kind of like, okay, your incentive to like bolt is just, through the roof. But you think about like even the examples like, besides just like Mercer, that was like an example of a team that was mostly kind of like a cohesive group of like 4 or 5 guys that played a lot together. If you use the examples in the past of, let's say, where a team maybe won an upset because frankly, they had like the best player on the floor. Maybe they didn't have as much talent overall, but they had the best player in the game. I was thinking like of Lehigh in 2012 when they beat Duke. You think about like CJ McCollum. He dumped 30 on Duke that night, and that second round upset that Lehigh had against the Blue Devils. That was his junior year. He was scoring like, God, I think it was like, 20 plus, 20 to 25 points a game, like his sophomore to junior year. His freshman year, he was already scoring like 19 points a game when he came to Lehigh. Yeah. So you just think about that. Like
he's not there.
The example now of how kids are transferring out, and use the criteria, to what we just discussed. Not only would CJ McCollum not be there his junior year, to play against Duke and beat them.
Sophomore.
He wouldn't even been there the sophomore year. He would have gone because remember he was from Canton, Ohio. If you put him into the time machine, move him forward to today, Ohio State's probably offering him like nice 7 figures to go ahead and just drop what he's doing in Lehigh and come to Columbus and be our starting 2 guard.
And don't think for a minute that Michigan State, Michigan, Indiana wouldn't be in on that kid too. That there would be a bidding war for this kid coming forward. And I just would say that it's not because like the rankers don't necessarily miss kids. It's not that. It's not like they looked at him and they looked at him under this extreme microscope and said, "Boy, this kid just doesn't have it." It's not like coaches with offers missed him either. There are sometimes sometimes there are academic issues, to be perfectly honest. I don't know if that's the case with CJ McCollum, but there are some academic issues with some certain players. There's also times where it's like, what circuit are you playing on? Are you getting was there something like, let's say you came out of a Canton, Ohio, and there were 7 other players in the state or 8 other players in the state that just kind of sucked the oxygen out of the room.
Right.
And they were the ones who were doing the Peach Jam and doing the 3S and doing all the other types of circuits where they were just getting the exposure. And this kid's kind of just going through maybe a secondary circuit or maybe doesn't play a whole lot. I mean, there's that element too, where they may be playing travel basketball just on a different, in a different area where they're not getting seen by Division I coaches. They're being seen, or Division I high major coaches. They're being seen by, assistants at places like, where your best offer is going to be Southern Illinois or Lehigh, versus you're looking at breaking into those power conferences. And then all of a sudden, because you can hop on Synergy and you start looking at players and, recruiting coordinator are going, "Hey, there's this kid we've been hearing about. We're getting some static on. We just looked him up on, we checked out, his BPMs here. This is, or we scouted him and we played these guys. We scouted the kid. This kid may be able to play." And they keep watching him. They develop a relationship. Because I think in some respects, like buy games to me, I think are going to be really important for mid and low major players, because now it's an opportunity for them to get into a gymnasium. I think IU's picked up a couple guys that they played against.
True.
That
I played against Sam Houston State this last year.
So you go and you go and granted, there's really nobody in the in the assembly hall that's the same one to the other. But you talk about the greatest recruiting visit ever. You go to a home game, and if let's say you go to Assembly Hall, you're at Sam Houston State, and the place is, to you, it's packed. Yeah. Like to IU fans, there may be a few empty seats. We're like, man, where did everybody go? But to this kid, this may be the first time he's played in front of this many people in his life, in an electric atmosphere. Going, man, this is a pretty cool place. And when IU picks up the phone and calls, when Kentucky picks up the phone and calls, when Xavier picks up the phone and calls, you're going to be like, this isn't a bad place to be.
Right. Yeah, no, and it's true, especially given that like the portal, because it is a constrained time window. You do have to sort of like find those different opportunities to to actually have like interactions with kids. That's why, again, like the Rolodex of your assistants matters a lot in terms of being able to access kids in the portal. But like you said, Bob, I mean, some of the circumstantial ones are like, yeah, hey, we played against this kid, we really liked him, and we can quickly pick up the phone and like say, hey, look, we watched you, we saw you, what our arena's like, you've eaten at least one or two of our restaurants when you were in town. So it's
factors in the decision, I would think. I mean, in some respects, like if you're there and you have this to compare and contrast to 2 other places, you're like, maybe this is my place. I felt like I belonged here. Yeah. And it's and you're right about like the rankings and things like that. I mean, obviously I've always been accused of being like a shill for the rankers and all that, which I deny, but I will say again that the one admonition I make about like the portal and high school rankings is they're actually very deceptive. And we could probably do a pod on this sometime in the future, but there's an interesting phenomenon in the portal in the fact that many of the kids that were misranked tend to end up in the portal. It's the kids that were overranked
went to a Power 5 school, can't break the starting lineup. Where do they go? They go down. On the flip side, you get all these kids that were underranked, go to like say a major or like lower tier school, blow up. Where they're going? Well, they're going up. So that creates this sort of distortion in the numbers. And if there's one thing I wish I could like just jump in on different podcasts and just like put a note in there that says, guys, don't pay attention to high school rankings for portal players, because not only they're not quote unquote, it's not about accuracy per se. It's just that they're deceiving. Is because again, most of the players that are ranked accurately, they have a much higher probability of staying where they are because they know exactly, like they're basically fulfilling what they were supposed to do. Yeah, I know I was like a top 75 kid and boom, I've got the role of a top 75 kid. So that's typically, the one thing I kind of point out when people get a little bit too tuned up about the rankings. In terms of, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to just jump in because we go, and I'm just going to talk about Tayshawn Comer for just a minute, just a brief moment, because it reminded me of a conversation I had with somebody years ago during COVID. They had this the game where I think it was Logan Duncombe and Trey Kaufman-Wren shut down Caleb First. I can't remember if that you know what I'm talking about was that summer of 2020 where the Indiana Elite and Indy Heat played, I believe.
Oh yeah, well, Duncombe kind of abused Caleb First in the post. That's what I remember. And that was a huge thing like at the time because there was literally nothing else to talk about. But the juniors in that group were it was Tayshawn Comer and Fletcher Lawyer were playing on the same AAU team. I believe Blake Wesley was in that either in that game or in the other was in one of those games as well. Yeah. He ended up going one and done out of Notre Dame. But I remember having the observation. It's like, Fletcher Lawyer's an elite shooter. I could tell that. But I like Tayshawn Comer's game as a well-rounded player more. And someone kind of said, "Are you nuts?" And I'm like, well, yeah, probably. But if I'm looking for a player that's going to impact all the other areas, if I have shooting, I'm okay with Tayshawn Comer because I like how he moves the ball, I like how he plays defense. I really like how he can kind of just create stuff for others. Yeah. And Lawyer, and it's been proven kind of time and time again, you give him daylight, he's going to hit. He does one, and this is a good thing about Matt Painter. Matt Painter finds guys who can do one thing at an almost above elite level. Yeah. And then he gets a bunch of those guys who can do one thing at an above elite level, and he gets them to play together in the right sort of system and with the right sort of actions and the right sort of philosophy guiding it. But I would say that for a lot of college basketball teams, I think Tayshawn Comer at Nebraska is going to be great, even though he doesn't shoot the ball particularly well at all. Mm-hmm. He's going to get guys shots because of the way he plays the game. Yeah. And I think that that's the sort of thing where, you have, and that's again, the question of sucking oxygen out of the room. You may miss something with the Tayshawn Comer because you're really kind of more watching a Fletcher Lawyer. Mm-hmm. Then you may miss what's going on in that other thing. It's kind of like Sean East is a prime example of this too. Like how was Sean East enhanced or hurt by playing alongside Romeo Langford for as long as he did? Right. I mean, it gave him attention, obviously. People knew who he was because he was around Romeo.
Right. Right. And so maybe that gets him where he can actually get to that UMass, where he gets the UMass offer, right? Where then he leverages it upwards. But because eventually he could kind of show himself to like, okay, I can actually move myself up. Yeah. Whereas before it's like, well, he looks like he projects to be an Atlantic 10 player or an Atlantic or a Missouri Valley type player. Would eventually he then can kind of level up a couple more where he can level up into a Power 5 deal his senior year because he's just stayed around and done those things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's also like just thinking back, like, talking about like the rankings, there's like the high school rankings and then there's the portal rankings. And,
right.
There's been like complaints, obviously, and you've obviously heard them before too. It's like, well, the portal rankings are terrible. Why can't the rankers, get this right? And I think one of the biggest problems is that in high school, these cohorts of players, let's say like, you're the junior, let's say you're the junior class, at any given time, or a senior class, 2019, all those 2019 kids, they've been playing against each other for years. Right. In the circuit in the summers against each other. So there's direct face-to-face competition. Sometimes these like elite players are playing against these other elite players dozens of times over the course of their sophomore, junior, senior years. in the portal, there's none of that. There's no direct competition. There's nothing that's like bringing all these guys together at once where you can kind of say, okay, yeah, well, that guy, he's like the 5th best shooting guard here. That guy over there is actually number 1 shooting guard here. So I'd say that the portal rankings are almost like the pre-ABCD, pre-night camp high school rankings of like the 1980s. It's almost like, Clark Francis and Brick Oettinger, like just taking a stab. Is like, well, okay, these guys never played against each other. I think that guy out in California is number 1, and this guy over in Nebraska is number 2. It's just like it's an educated guess. Whereas in high school, at least, you have some kind of like paired comparisons constantly running in the summer with the AAU circuit.
Well, and I would also kind of look at this, and if you're a mid-major, how do you, because now that you, okay, once your alphas go, basically you're a AAA baseball team now.
Right.
So where do you find your AA and your single A?
Yeah.
Are you going to start looking at NAIA? Are you going to start looking at Division II? Are you going to start looking to poach? You could definitely get guys coming down off of, good, former sweet spot type. And I don't think you're going to see a lot of sweet spot players coming from, I think you're going to see more. You're going to see fewer of these. You're not going to see a whole lot of Christian Landers out there. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
As a volume, like if you're looking to restock your team, finding a bunch of Christian Landers and Logan Duncombe's who leave Indiana is probably not a great strategy unless you're Will Wade and you were able to do that, which Will Wade was able to do at
McNeese State.
McNeese State. You're probably go ahead, because that's I think
I want to get through sort of like the summary of the problem. Let's say with the mid majors are facing, and then we can kind of maybe jump into the like what do they do going forward. So just like as a summary, some stats that I just found, like 70% of the mid major first team all conference players in 2025, the ones that had remaining eligibility, they're transferring to new schools, 78%. So that's a pretty obviously devastating bleed rate if you're a mid-major school trying to retain as many of your good players with experience as you possibly can. So it means that only 22% are staying. Only 2 of the mid-major players of the year in 2025, conference players of the year, have remaining eligibility, are returning to their schools next year. And 13 mid-major player of the year are transferring to new programs. And I'll say that if you look at the numbers just overall, and just, I've kind of gone up and down like the mid-major ranks this year, and even kind of looking in the past, like in 2024. If you're looking for just like a kind of like just an easy number to like estimate or explain to people, like, okay, well, how bad is the bleed rate for the mid majors? Like, what's the number? And depending upon like, what sort of like what configuration you put in the analysis, they're generally going to be between 75 and 85%. So if you want to like just a generic number, it's about 80%. 80% of the good players in mid-major are leaving mid-majors and generally moving up. So 20% are staying. And so the interesting thing is that if you look at that analytically, those good players are still going to be going to the mid-major schools. They're still going to be committing to the schools. It's not that they're just like magically disappearing altogether. Good players are still going to be going to, the Conference USA or the SWAC or Missouri Valley. It's just they're not going to be staying very long. And like what you said, Bob, it is almost a little bit like, like a AAA baseball team. It's going to be something like the minor leagues, where the big schools don't have to like take a chance on these sub 100 recruits anymore. And it's like, oh, well, where's the diamond in the rough? You don't have to do that anymore. You just like, well, the diamonds will reveal themselves. We're just going to watch the mid majors. We're not going to waste any scholarships on these kids, as quote unquote projects. We'll just wait to see, like, what kid blows up at Eastern Illinois or Mercer or Southern or Southwest Louisiana State or whatever school you can think of.
You're also looking when you said good players, not all of the good players leave, because you have good players that have yet to become the top player.
Right.
When you talk about mid-major players of the year, that's the best player in the ASUN or the WAC or the SWAC. You still have guys who are backloading that can jump in and potentially, like when Gordon Hayward left Butler, Butler still ended up going to a Final Four or going to a final game the next season.
Right.
They had enough back there, and they, using Sheldon Mack, using Matt Howard, using their system, they were able to figure out how to continue to generate enough offense. And was it system based? Yeah, you could say it was system based, but you could also say you had the right guys running the system and the right guys making that work with the right coach in Brad Stevens at the time to be able to do that. But it's a whole idea of like, okay, so if you lose your 3-hole hitter to the majors, you may have another 3-hole hitter sitting there. Yeah. You may not need to go find him from a lower area. You may have it on your bench, the guy that's willing to step up, and if you give him a little more production, he's going to actually shine a little more.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the competitiveness conversation that, yeah, your higher BPM guys on these teams, your higher scoring guys on these teams, your high utilization players, utilization with production. Like when you showed the two that didn't, I mean, I looked up those two players when you shared it with a few of us a couple days ago. I'm like, yeah. Well, one was a guy who basically was just an at the rim scorer at 6'7", driving the basketball.
Right.
And the other one was a big that had a less than 1% block rate. He was a 6'9" center who I didn't watch him at all, but I just had this feeling of this kid that just has a meat hook and is really effective at using his body. He's just this like 6'8" kind of just offensive football guard who just uses his butt to get guys out of the way and score layups.
Right.
And doesn't really translate well to a Power 5 team.
Yeah.
Not to knock on Peyton Sparks, but kind of like a Peyton Sparks would be a good example of this. That he's may not, and he doesn't shoot it well, and he may shoot it decent enough from the perimeter, but it's just not enough. He may not have the mobility to play on a Power 5 roster.
Yeah, and I think, if you think about it, and you're right, like the AAA metaphor for how, let's say, Power 5 coaches will look at the mid majors. Yeah, they're going to be looking through specifically for like a very specific type of player that fills a very specific gap within their roster toolbox, and so that's kind of the interesting thing is that you kind of look at the orientation of the players that are ranked, let's say, within the conference. And you'll see sometimes like the guys that are sort of like in the, let's say, like the 7th or 8th best player in the conference that has returning eligibility. Well, that's what Alabama or whoever's going after. But then the guy that's number 1 or 2, it's like they went to like, maybe a lower like Power 5 school that just maybe doesn't have quite as much credibility. You think, well, why did that happen? Why did this guy down here get, basically jutted way up, and this guy that's kind of above him in the conference, didn't get quite as good of an offer? And it's because of what you said, Bob, kind of that particularity of the needs of the Power 5 schools. It's like, hey, look, if there's a high demand for shooters, then the best shooter in, let's say, conference, whatever, like the Metro Atlantic, that kid may be like the 8th or 9th best player that has remaining eligibility, but he may be the number 1 target of all the Power 5 schools, above all the other kids that are like ranked quote unquote above him in the conference, but they don't shoot as well as him.
Well, you take like Lamar Wilkins is a great example, is where you actually have a kid that can not only just shoot the ball extremely well, he can get his own shot extremely well from distance, and he's an elite passer. Yeah. So you get all those factors together. We'll teach him how to defend at this level. We will figure out how to get him to defend at the level we're at. That's my job as a college coach. It's your job as any coach is, okay, I'm going to take your strengths, but I'm going to make your weaknesses good enough that you are passable, if not decent, if not even good, if I get you in the right scheme and the right system. And so I think that's another question. I think that a lot of programs, like if you're Kelvin Sampson's a great example of this, because I think, you look at his time in Houston, he took Houston from being basically a mid-major into a power school.
Right.
He did it using a system, and then the talent has been continuing to upgrade slowly over the course of his tenure at Houston. Shaka Smart's players might not translate at VCU, much like his system doesn't translate, just because teams are going to, especially if they have time to prep against you, especially if you're out of that tournament type environment where you're not hitting on all cylinders. I think it's really hard to run that, exactly what he was running, the chaos type system he was running at VCU, at even, definitely didn't work at Texas. He didn't do that at Texas, and he needed more offensively because he wasn't able to score. He wasn't able to generate enough points off of defensive turnovers and bad shots in transition.
Right.
He needed more offense. He's doing better at that with Marquette. But it's not, Marquette's not playing VCU basketball from 10 years ago by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
So systemically speaking, you have guys that can kind of figure out, you need to have guys who can actually be integrated into a Power 5 system and who aren't just getting this because they're the fastest guy down the floor out of the SWAC.
Yeah.
And they can play above the rim.
Right.
And maybe they show that well when they play Purdue on an off shooting night and get the upset or get it close, but there needs to be, again, the sort of thing of contending there. But I also think at the same time, like you look at what Ben McCollum did at Drake, he slowed it down.
Yeah.
And so systemically, you can find a way to build a winner in the mid majors if you can just do enough, basically win your conference or try to be over, get into that 20 to 25, 30 win spot. Like if you're Drake, 30 wins. Or if you're like University of California, San Diego was another example of this year. They didn't do a whole lot out of. They really weren't looking to score with the primary ball handler out of ball screens or the roller. They were 96th percentile in spot ups, and they were excellent at doing it. So what they were doing was they were moving the defense using basically just they were attacking closeouts and doing some off ball movements, and they were running almost a more traditional dribble drive motion type of team with a little more movement thrown in. And so just those little tweaks systemically can actually get you to maybe be successful with these players in those areas and be able to create a winner where you're at with the right guys.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, do you keep your guys or no, do they move on? Or can you kind of Butler way this, kind of like how Butler was using almost a version of continuity ball screen to get the ball to be able to get level 3 shots using guys like Hahn. Hahn gets shots at Butler that he probably wouldn't have gotten at IU. Because of what they were running, how they were running it. So you've got that going for you.
Yeah.
That's the way to compete.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's interesting, like you bring up the Drake example. Drake, in a strange way, was they actually sort of retained some of those advantages that we talked about before, like, with like roster continuity, even though it was like a new team and a new coach, because the coach brought basically his whole team with him
from D2.
Remember, what's that?
From D2.
Yeah, like Northwest Missouri State. So was it from the team like Sturts?
Yep.
I think Abreu and Mascari, I think, were all starters at Northwest Missouri State, and they just like became starters at Drake. And so that's another interesting thing, is that when we're talking about like coaching hires, you think about like, well, DeVries is obviously like bringing his son to IU as like an example, but there are other coaches that you've seen that have been hired, and it's kind of implied that, okay, well, when you hire me with the portal now, I will bring these 2, 3, 4 players with me. That's kind of like, I mean, obviously, like with McCollum, well, now he's just bringing a lot of those kids forward from Northwest Missouri State to Drake, and now they're going to be going to Iowa City with him at Iowa. So that's another interesting wrinkle we consider the coaching decisions that ADs make. It's like, oh, not are you having this coach, but this coach is also bringing a potential year one portfolio of players that have some continuity experience playing together with them at the same time.
Well, and one reason I kind of picked up Drake and UC out of my 2 examples was that Drake won a 6-11 game against a really pretty good Missouri team by all stretches.
Yeah.
And UC San Diego was within a couple possessions against Michigan.
Right.
So both of those teams kind of showed in a one-game, one-off that they were able to be competitive against a tournament-level team. And in Michigan, as well as, I believe it was Michigan they were that UC was against.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those were teams that honestly, a couple balls bounce a different way. They go from being in that sort of next 10% of college basketball into the low level of the top 5%. Like you could definitely argue with both those teams that there were times this year where they showed that they were top 5, that they were a potential top 5% type of program.
Yeah.
So there's that element, which, you look at those and systemically kind of what they were doing a little differently. Winning 30 games, whether you're doing it in the Valley or you're doing it in a power conference, is still very notable and should get the attention of athletic directors, should get the attention also of Power 5 schools who are looking at your players going, these kids can play. They can play.
Yeah. And I think also, like, just for the sake of the fans, I mean, that's like, answering the question, like, okay, well, why are there not as many upsets? Kind of the follow-up question is like, okay, well, looking forward, like, what's that going to look like? And well, I guess, maybe we should take a break and then we'll go to our transition to the close and answer that question. What does this look like going forward in terms of the potential for mid-majors and upsets in the future? So we'll bring that to the floor next on X's and Joes.
And welcome back to X's and Joes, where Mike Wiemuth is with me, Bob Moats, and we're going to kind of wrap up here our conversation about impacts on mid-majors. And yeah, I mean, to kind of put this in perspective just a moment, the NCAA has a great tool. I mean, we're going to put this in the show notes, where they actually have records for every seed. So, like, what would you guess the closest, like, win percentage would be between like a 116, 215, 314, 413, 512, 611, 710, 89? Which one do you think is the narrowest gap?
Oh, I looked at, wasn't it like 10-7 or 11-6 or something like that?
It's 611, 710, exactly. They're basically.
I looked at those numbers, like a year or two ago in a different data analysis. So yeah.
And I mean, I saw that. I'm eating dinner. I looked at this real quick. I was like, I'm just curious. I haven't really thought about this a little bit. And then I'm going, wait a minute. I always kind of thought the 710, 8-9 were very equitable. They're not. Actually, 611, 710 are.
So
once
damn New Mexico upsets.
Right, exactly. Or Dayton. Dayton is another example of this.
Like Mountain West. There's always like that strong 11 seed Mountain West team that just pummels like
Nico Medvedev doing stuff, and it's just. Yeah. But yeah, but the 1-2 is like when you think that 1 versus 16 is 158 and 2 since 1985.
Yeah.
When you think about that for just a moment and just realize that we make that, I even referenced Purdue. We didn't reference Virginia. I referenced Purdue. Yeah. Virginia, you could definitely make the case because UMBC played at a tempo that Virginia just completely just took Virginia out of the way they had to win at that time. Yeah. But even the 215s, these are 90% plus situations. Even going into the 512s that everyone used to talk about, well, you got to pick a 512 every year. I mean, the 5 seed still wins almost 2/3 of the time. So the point is, is this a blip? And I would say it probably is a blip. No, I would say it's not a blip. I would think that this is probably going to be more of I don't think it's a blip at all, because I think already from a standpoint of attention, okay, three seeds get through the tournament in a year. We always pay attention to the one that didn't.
Yeah. And
most years, 4 out of 4 get through. So you start thinking of it, and when you start thinking about how this is going to work for those, again, a lot of times low major teams in those 16, 15, 14 type teams, these one bid conferences, teams like Valley teams are going to have to really be very competitive and make sure that they're sitting in a 12, 10, or even a 12, 11, 10 type of situation. They want to get themselves to that 12, 11, 10 type situation where they at least have a fighting chance. But I mean, I think that I do think that this is going to be kind of more of a long-term, you're going to see fewer. I mean, I think those percentages are going to raise over a period of time, just because of you're bringing up the whole idea that CJ McCollum doesn't stay at Lehigh 4 years. Mercer doesn't have a 20-plus win team stay together for 3 seasons.
Yeah. Well, and also if you think about, like, using the metaphor of the minor league baseball, it's, we're trying to answer the question, okay, well, let's say, you're losing 80% of your returning talent.
Mhm.
If you're a mid-major, where are you finding the equitable replacement of those players? In theory, the two most likely scenarios are kids moving up from D2 to D3, from D2, D3, NAIA to to the mid-major, or kids moving down,
Right.
like McNeese State, or they had some kids. They had Garcia was from UMass, and
Yep.
Copeland was from Syracuse, and the problem is, like, even like D2, like, think about, like, Elijah Freeman, is like the best target D2 player last year. Well, he didn't
Right.
move up to the mid-major. He went right to Auburn.
Right.
So this, like, this hoovering up of talent that the big boys are doing, it's not just impacting, like, the mid-majors in terms of taking players away from the mid-majors. They're also taking away the potential replacement of those players that the mid-majors would need to replace the players that are leaving for, like, the Auburns and the Alabamas. So it's basically taking the players now and taking the players that you would want to replace the players with what you're leaving. So that's kind of I think, just sort of like the dual challenge that you're getting if you're a mid-major program. Now, I will say I agree with you. My longstanding theory when the portal came out and the NIL was that the tournament impact would be that it would just be a. I think. Well, I think Siri seems to be spying on us.
I think he was. I think she was. Good call. That's happened before.
Like, where's this voice coming from? So,
it didn't sound like Lil. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, Lily does not look like that. Yeah, exactly. But no, just just thinking about, like, the theory I had before about, like, the portal and NIL is that there would just be a big trade-off of the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Is you'd be swapping good games in the early rounds for good games in the later rounds. Less upsets early, but more, like, really cool competitive, like, Elite Eight, Final Four games. And I think, like, to answer the question, like, okay, well, there will be less upsets. Will there still be some upsets, and what will they look like? And I think if you had to identify, let's say, an example of a team, like a team's roster construction that would still be eligible to have a team that could, knock off, like a 3 or 4 seed, I do think of, like, the Indiana State team from 2024.
Right.
You think about, like, it'll be almost like an Ocean's 11 style roster construction. It's going to be like guys that come together from multiple sources, like not just like one place, but just like multiple angles.
Or
go ahead.
Or if you're Drake, Danny Ocean gets all of his war buddies, and then they take the casinos that way. I mean, you got to realize that there's 2 Ocean 11's models here, Mike.
That's true. There's the original. The original Sinatra versus Clooney.
And again, I feel like I'm contractually obligated to say that both movies are exactly the same quality.
Yeah.
Even though the second one was much more thrilling. But, hey, both those guys spent time along the Ohio River, Sinatra and Madison, for a few weeks, and George grew up on it.
Yeah.
But I mean, but you're right. There is that sort of targeted assassin type thing where you look at that, or you look at what McCollum did at Drake, and you just we're bringing the band from D2 in, and we're going to go win the Valley, and then we're going to beat Missouri because they don't want to play at our tempo.
Yeah. Well, you think about, I mean, exactly. That's the other alternative, obviously, is just like, the new coach gets hired and just, again, just swoops in all of his players from the championship winning level team at the lower level. Like if you think about Indiana State, I was just like looking at their roster. So Avila and Julian Larry were the 2 ISU high school recruits, like the kids that were recruited by ISU straight out of high school. You had Kent was from Bradley, Swope was from Southern Indiana, and Conwell was from South Florida. So that kind of like roster where you can get guys that are coming, through your program as high school recruits, guys that are basically coming laterally, like from the same conference, like, from Bradley, and other ones that are coming like straight up from like, lower tier division, like Conwell did with Southern Indiana. So I would say that, again, there will be upsets. There will be less of them, but there's still a window of opportunity for them to take place, and they will tend to be like, I think, it will not be like having the olden days where, like, the youthful and young Gonzaga, like always knocking off like upper tier teams. It's going to be like these one shot, flash in the pan, single sniper shots of a roster that's put together quickly, blows up, beats the really good team, and then all those players just disband and go their merry way to like other Power 5 schools.
Remember, the Dick Simon driver never won the Indy 500.
Yeah.
There was a reason for that.
A reason for that.
And I sent you an article last night, but I read it, and I can't remember, and maybe stick this in the notes also, about what donors are saying at these mid majors, low majors. And it's like, we want to win, so we're going to put money into this, but we can't nearly. There's a world where Valpo, because it's just the amount of alums versus the amount of alums at an IU or a Purdue, can't compete.
Right.
Unless you get a T. Boone Pickens type situation at a small school, which I don't think I can think of one off the top of my head. You might make a case for what St. John's is doing. You might make a case for St. John's.
Right.
But there's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of stuff that could go wrong with that situation.
Exactly.
The frustration level is, well, why are we putting money in just for? I mean, it's almost like we're buying lottery tickets. And I think at the end of the day, the mid majors are going to kind of figure this out over time. That it's like winning your conference. And I also do have a sneaking suspicion that over time, that things like, was it better for ISU to have the NIT run? I think long term it probably was.
Absolutely.
Because I think that revitalized interest in that program that can last 2 or 3 years. And if they can kind of continue to do well in the Valley and create good basketball, places like Terre Haute, Indiana, niche markets with their own TV station, Evansville, if USI or Evansville figures it out, right. And they can kind of start, ginning up excitement, because it's something for the kids to do on a Saturday that for $15-20 you can take, you and your son can go, and they can get a chance to catch a T-shirt out of a cannon. And they get to, and for a year, they get to know, kind of like when the Purple Laces were down in Evansville, or you see Victory Field with the Indians, and the kids, they're excited to see Rowdy, and they're excited to see mascots, and get a hot dog and all that fun stuff. There's a way to kind of market this, I think, for mid majors where you can still be successful, you can still get an adequate level of talent, and just make it work. I think at the end of the day, for us, it's hard because we haven't always lived in this world, but for our years of awareness, starting in 1985, and even before then, there was always kind of, we grew up with the Indiana State thing also, where anybody can make it, right?
Right.
If Larry Bird just hitchhikes his way to Terre Haute again, we got it.
Yeah. Just have to find that next Larry Bird,
You got to find the next Larry Bird, because clearly the state of Indiana is crawling with Larry Birds.
Yeah.
But I think that there was the whole thing of, you go back to the 50s, 60s, going, in that time in a place like Evansville or Terre Haute, where you used to have the university versus college division national championships.
Right.
There might be something over time that we start realizing, that watching Auburn pummel a team, the team gives them a good first half, it's close, maybe the team's down by 2 or 3 at the first half, and then Auburn comes out and wins by 30, just isn't fun anymore. Now, maybe those kids find it fun, and those kids are still excited to go to the dance, don't get me wrong, and that's totally understandable. But those kids celebrating at the end of the NIT for UT Chattanooga were just as excited.
Right.
There might be something to this sort of re-stratification where we just look at this a little differently. And I'm not saying we do or we don't. I'm just saying that that's a conclusion I think some could come to, where it's like, it'd be kind of nice if we traveled to Indianapolis and we had dinner at St. Elmo's Steakhouse, and we watch our alma mater, let's say we watch Wright State potentially win a national championship, and it's still a national championship. You win a national championship, a 1A and a 4A state title are still a state title. It doesn't matter the size of your school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, we're still in flux, and again, we're desperately searching for the new market equilibrium for players and talent distribution within the mid majors and how they compete in the tournament going forward. But yeah, I think we're sort of in like year 1 or 2 of like data collection.
Mm-hmm.
It's 3 years from now, I think we'll have a lot of good information that will say, okay, this is the direction it's really going. I mean, even going into next year, we'll kind of, at least the arrow will be pointing a particular direction. We don't know like entirely where it's going to settle, but I think, it's still too early to just make, sweeping declarations.
Right.
And say, well, we're screwed. This is exactly how the system's going to be working going forward. It's some of this is going to be reasonably temporary and flux until things settle down a bit, and we're not there yet.
You might find a bunch of guys from Yugoslavia coming in as super sophomores and winning for a place like Bradley. You never know. It's
yeah, exactly. Especially after they transfer from Illinois.
They transfer from Illinois, right? Exactly.
Down the road, and they're right there.
Well, on that note, thanks to Bob Thompson for the music and the sound of the show, and special thanks to John Rigger of rigdesign.com for designing the look and the logo of the show. And thanks also to who you met earlier tonight, William McDermott, our producer, for cleaning us up and making us sound and look as good as we could possibly look.
Exactly. And looking forward, well, we haven't really settled on episode 33 yet, have we?
We've got a couple things cooking, and so I think for us, we're on the Substacks, we're on the Distwit, whatever we call this stuff now. I just type a bunch of stuff in the phone and I just post it someplace, and people kind of go, "Yeah, whatever." The Moats guy's talking again. It's nothing, whatever, And I don't know. So we're gonna kind of, once we get all kind of figured out in 2 weeks, over the next couple of weeks, we got a couple things special because we're kind of excited about this whole bison thing.
Right. It's exciting.
but we're also really excited about talking about this stuff because we actually kind of looked at this episode and said, wait, we have 2 episodes here, because Mike was looking at this, how it impacts mid-major. I'm like, but what about how it impacts everybody else? Like, how does that look, and what's the new process? Like, what are we really looking for? What should we be looking for going into next season? So we're going to be going a whole lot of different directions like we usually do. And maybe we'll have another Sinatra movie reference at some point in time.
Yeah. Well, I know
we'll George Clooney.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get into the really old stuff. Well, I know at some point we're going to do another Ask Us Anything in the next few weeks. So we'll
do that too.
We'll recycle that framework and have another. So we'll send out on the interwebs soliciting questions and things like that. We'll have a few more guests, some familiar faces, some new ones. Will probably be coming around. But yeah, the summer is always kind of interesting, just because we're not bound by anything. Not that we're even bound by anything during the season, but we're even far less restricted when nothing's going on. Not really even so much in recruiting per se. So it's an exciting time to do what we want when nothing else is really going on.
And it's 2 months till Puerto Rico. That's there may be some stuff happening over the summer with recruiting, but that's not really our jam, baby.
Yeah. So whatever we do for the next episode, it will post sometime the next 2 weeks, whatever that's going to be. So just stay tuned, and we'll announce whatever it is, in advance.
We'll let you know also, but in advance also, just to give you a general idea to know if just because it's fun for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not. We may not. We may just cut the damn thing and just say, hey, here it is. You're gonna love it.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know if we're going to be more or less disciplined now that we have a producer around.
We're going to corrupt that poor young man. It's how we work.
William's probably listening to this, on the recording, and I promise you, William, in working with us, you will have to deal with far less LSD trips and Yoko Ono than George Martin ever did. We can make that sincere promise to you. We'll be much better behaved than those lads from Liverpool. So
we'll do our best because there's something in the way. There's we can kind of throw. There's and it's always a hard day's night. It's always a hard day's night around here.
Exactly.
So okay,
and especially
all right,
when you work 8 days a week. All right. Well, we'll bring this endless conversation to a conclusion and say this was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including the Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Right Up Meridian, the Dribble Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and backhomenetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
And I'm Bob Moats saying, in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
I'm not going to do that whole Queen thing. Only Paul McCartney could get away with like having a love letter to, the head of the Church of England and, the
right. Yeah.
The one person that can technically cut his head off. And, this shows the power that he had back then, especially with the ladies. So
they also waited 30 seconds to make sure that nobody in Buckingham Palace was actually still listening to the damn album. I'm sure Princess Anne was, but that's good.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.